The gravel road leading to the high-fence perimeter of Miller Creek wasn't just quiet, it felt completely abandoned, a jagged line of gray cutting through the thick pine woods of East Texas. For 42 years, the sign at the county line read, "Welcome to Miller Creek, protected by Sheriff Arthur Vance." To the 4,000 souls who lived there, that sign wasn't just a political statement, it was a promise of absolute safety. If your house caught fire in the middle of the night, Arthur Vance was the first guy there with a shovel and a blank check. When the textile mill shut down in 2018, leaving half the town without a pension, Vance quietly went to the county commissioners and slashed his own salary by 60%, funneling the remaining budget into a makeshift food pantry operating right out of the belly of the sheriff's department. He was a mountain of a man with a silver-threaded beard, pale blue eyes that looked like they had seen every tragedy a small town could offer, and a voice that sounded like heavy machinery moving over crushed rock. Everyone loved him. Everyone trusted him. If someone from out of town dared to question why the county crime rates had dropped to a statistical zero over a single decade, they were politely, or sometimes not so politely, told to mind their own business. The town backed the sheriff, unconditionally, because the sheriff had sacrificed his entire adult life to back the town. But on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, an unpaid 24-year-old local archival clerk named Clara Evans pulled a water-damaged cedar crate from the crawlspace beneath the historical courthouse basement. She wasn't looking for trouble, she was just trying to digitalize old agricultural land deeds from the late 1950s. Instead, tucked behind a false bottom made of rotting plywood, her fingers brushed against a single, heavily laminated legal document dated November 12, 1984. It bore the official blue ink seal of the state treasury and carried Arthur Vance's jagged, unmistakable signature from the very week he first took his oath of office. As Clara wiped the mildewed dust from the top paragraph, the room around her seemed to lose all its oxygen. The words printed on that page didn't just contradict 40 years of local history, they mathematically proved that every single resident of Miller Creek had been living inside a meticulously engineered, multi-million-dollar lie. To understand why this document felt like an explosive device, you have to understand what Miller Creek actually was. It wasn't just a town, it was an isolated ecosystem of profound gratitude. In the early 1980s, the region was entirely plagued by the toxic runoff of a massive, bankrupt chemical refinery 5 miles upstream. Cattle were dying in the pastures, the local well water tasted faintly of sulfur and rusted zinc, and pediatric cancer rates were creeping up to 3 times the state average. The federal government had essentially written the area off as an environmental casualty zone, refusing to grant Superfund status because of a bureaucratic loophole involving corporate ownership transfers. The town was suffocating, real estate values plumbed to absolute zero, and people were packed up to leave their family lands forever. That was precisely when a young, decorated military veteran named Arthur Vance returned home from overseas, wore the silver star of the sheriff, and told everyone to hold their ground. Within 6 months of Vance taking office, the upstream chemical plant mysteriously burned to the ground in a fire that state investigators eventually ruled an accidental electrical failure. Weirdly enough, the toxic runoff stopped completely. Within 2 years, a mysterious, incredibly wealthy private charitable trust based out of Delaware, known only as the Horizon Foundation, began quietly buying up the dead land surrounding the old refinery. Investing millions into advanced soil remediation, building top-tier medical clinics that offered completely free healthcare to every resident, and providing low-interest small business loans that turned Miller Creek into an affluent, prosperous oasis surrounded by dying rural counties. When asked how a rookie sheriff had managed to attract a multi-million-dollar philanthropic foundation to a forgotten corner of Texas, Vance would always give the same humble, tired smile, shrug his broad shoulders, and say he just wrote a lot of passionate letters to rich folks who wanted a tax write-off. The town believed him because they wanted to believe him. The prosperity was real, the new schools were beautiful, the cancer rates dropped back to zero. Arthur Vance was their guardian angel in a tan uniform. For 40 years, anyone who asked too many questions about where the Horizon Foundation's money actually originated was treated as a pariah. But as Clara stared at the laminated document in the dim light of the courthouse basement, the romantic myth of Miller Creek shattered into sharp, jagged pieces. The document wasn't a charitable agreement, and it wasn't a state grant. It was a legally binding, top-secret indemnity contract between the office of the High Sheriff of Miller Creek and a shell company directly owned by Vanguard Industrial Disposal, the very parent corporation that had abandoned the toxic chemical refinery upstream in 1982. The contract explicitly detailed an arrangement that made Clara's stomach turn completely over. Vanguard Industrial hadn't abandoned the town because they were bankrupt. They had staged a corporate restructuring to hide an illegal, deeply classified underground repository for weapons-grade chemical byproducts deep within the abandoned salt domes directly beneath the Miller Creek Public Park system. The documents stated that in exchange for absolute legal immunity, total protection from federal environmental inspectors, and the guaranteed silence of local law enforcement, Vanguard Industrial would funnel 8% of its global chemical storage revenue directly into a private account controlled exclusively by the sheriff. That account was the exact financial engine behind the Horizon Foundation. The beautiful free medical clinics, the immaculate public schools, the agricultural subsidies that saved every family farm, they weren't paid for by the kindness of anonymous billionaires. They were hush-money dividends paid by an international corporate polluter to keep an entire population happily, healthily, and blindly living directly on top of thousands of tons of buried, highly volatile neurotoxic waste. Arthur Vance hadn't saved the town from the monsters upstream. He had invited the monsters into the cellar, charged them a premium rent, and used a fraction of that blood money to build a paradise on the surface so no one would ever think to dig an inch beneath the grass. The sheer mathematical genius of the deception was terrifying. By funding the free healthcare system, Vance was ensuring that any early signs of chemical exposure among the citizens were treated immediately by doctors who were on the foundation's payroll, doctors who would attribute the illnesses to genetic anomalies or lifestyle choices, perfectly suppressing any medical paper trail that could alert the federal EPA. The document in Clara's hand even included an attached map, marked with tiny, hand-drawn red circles in Vance's own ink, detailing the exact subterranean paths where the concrete storage vaults were buried. The largest vault, containing over 400 barrels of untreated benzene compounds, lay exactly 80 feet directly beneath the outfield of the Little League baseball diamond where Clara's own little brother played every single Saturday morning. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The sheriff wasn't a hero who had sacrificed his wealth for his people, he was an active partner in a generational corporate crime, holding a whole community hostage in a golden cage of their own making. As she heard heavy, slow footsteps suddenly echoing on the wooden stairs directly above her head, Clara realized she had less than 10 seconds to hide the page. The heavy footsteps on the stairs stopped exactly 3 steps from the bottom. Clara could see the polished black leather of Sheriff Vance's boots through the gaps in the wooden risers. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slid the laminated contract between 2 completely unrelated 1950s tax ledgers, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped her flashlight. If Vance walked down into that damp basement right now, he would see the dust disturbed on the false bottom of the cedar crate. He would see the look of absolute terror in her eyes. Vance called out her name, his voice booming in the confined space, asking if she needed help carrying the heavy archive boxes up to the main office. It was a terrifyingly mundane question from a man who had spent 40 years shielding a toxic ticking time bomb beneath their feet. Clara managed to steady her voice just enough to reply that she was fine, just wrapping up for the day. He paused, a long, agonizing silence that felt like an eternity, before turning around and walking back up into the light. But Clara knew her safety was an illusion. The document was in her backpack, but she was trapped in a town where every single person, from the mayor to her own parents, owed their livelihood, their health, and their homes to the very system Vance had built. If she exposed the document, she wouldn't just be exposing a corrupt cop. She would be destroying the financial foundation of her entire community. She would be telling 4,000 people that their beautiful, safe paradise was built on top of a poisoned wasteland, and that their savior was the architect of their doom. How could she convince a town to destroy its own happiness for the sake of an uncomfortable truth? And more importantly, if Vance found out she had the papers, how far would he go to protect a 40-year-old secret that kept him in absolute power? What would you do if you were in Clara's shoes? Would you risk destroying the peace and financial stability of your entire hometown to expose a dangerous truth, or would you keep the secret to protect the people you love from a reality that could ruin them? Let us know in the comments below. Your answers might surprise you. If you're hooked on this mystery and want to see exactly how Clara navigates this web of small-town deception, make sure to hit that like button right now. It helps us bring you more thrilling, high-stakes stories just like this one. We are just getting to the absolute turning point of this story, where Clara has to make a choice that will change Miller Creek forever. If you want to find out what happens when she finally confronts the town with the evidence, and how Sheriff Vance reacts when his 40-year empire begins to crumble, you cannot miss the next chapter. Make sure you are fully subscribed to the channel and have your notification bell turned on so you get alerted the exact second the final part of this mystery drops. Trust me, the conclusion to this cover-up is something you will never see coming.